Have you ever wondered how a group of ordinary people, scattered across distant colonies, dared to challenge the most powerful empire on Earth? An empire whose navy ruled the oceans, whose armies had crushed nations, and whose king believed his authority came directly from God. And yet, against all odds, those colonies didn't just protest. They broke away, fought back, and created a new nation. But the real story of how America was founded is far more complicated, more emotional, and more human than the simple tale we usually hear. To understand how the United States of America was born, we have to travel back to a time when the idea of independence was dangerous, when loyalty to the crown was expected, and when speaking against the king could cost you everything. This is not just a story about battles and documents. It is a story about fear and courage, selfish interests and bold ideals, unity and deep division. And by the end of this journey, you'll see America's founding not as a clean moment in history, but as a long, painful, and extraordinary struggle that still shapes the world today. Long before the idea of a United States even existed, the land along the eastern edge of North America was dotted with British colonies. These colonies were not created with independence in mind. They were business ventures, religious refuges, and extensions of British power. People came for different reasons. Some were seeking wealth, others religious freedom, others simply survival. And for decades, most colonists considered themselves loyal British subjects. They spoke English, followed British laws, traded with British merchants, and proudly saw themselves as part of the British Empire. But distance changes everything. The Atlantic Ocean separated the colonies from London by weeks of travel. Over time, the colonies developed their own identities, their own economies, and their own ways of governing. Local assemblies made decisions. Merchants built trade networks that didn't always benefit Britain. Farmers relied on their own labor, not royal support. Slowly, without realizing it, the colonies were learning how to govern themselves. For many years, Britain allowed this independence in practice. As long as the colonies made money and stayed loyal, the crown didn't interfere much. This period is often called salutary neglect, and it gave colonists a taste of freedom they would never forget. But everything changed after one of the most expensive wars in British history. The French and Indian War, fought between 1754 and 1763, reshaped the future of America. Britain fought France for control of North America and won, but victory came at a massive cost. The war nearly doubled Britain's national debt. British leaders looked across the Atlantic and saw the colonies as the obvious solution. After all, the war had been fought largely to protect them. New taxes began to appear. The Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Acts. To British lawmakers, these were reasonable. To colonists, they felt like a betrayal. For the first time, Parliament was directly taxing people who had no representatives in Parliament. And this sparked a powerful idea that would echo through history: no taxation without representation. At first, resistance was not about independence. It was about rights. Colonists believed they deserved the same rights as any British citizen. Protests erupted. Pamphlets were printed. Boycotts hurt British businesses. Groups like the Sons of Liberty formed, organizing resistance and spreading messages that blended politics with emotion. For many ordinary people, this was their first taste of political activism. Tensions reached a breaking point in 1770 on a cold March night in Boston. British soldiers, surrounded by an angry crowd, fired their weapons. 5 colonists were killed. The event became known as the Boston Massacre. It was used as propaganda, fueling outrage and fear. To some, it proved British tyranny. To others, it showed how fragile order had become. Trust between the colonies and Britain was unraveling. Then came the moment that turned protest into open defiance. In 1773, colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped thousands of chests of tea into the water. This was not random chaos. It was a calculated political act. The Boston Tea Party directly challenged British authority, and Britain responded with force. The intolerable acts punished Massachusetts harshly. Ports were closed. Local government was restricted. British troops increased their presence. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, Britain unintentionally united the colonies. What happened to Boston, many feared, could happen anywhere. Colonial leaders began meeting in secret. The First Continental Congress gathered to coordinate resistance. Still, independence was not the goal for everyone. Many hoped the king would listen. Many feared what rebellion would bring. War with Britain was unthinkable to some, necessary to others. The first shots were fired in April 1775 at Lexington and Concord. No one knows who pulled the trigger first, but by the end of the day, there was no turning back. The American Revolutionary War had begun. Farmers, shopkeepers, and laborers faced the professional army of the British Empire. Even then, the idea of full independence remained controversial. It took words, not weapons, to push the colonies over the edge. In early 1776, a pamphlet titled Common Sense spread like wildfire. Written by Thomas Paine, it argued something radical. That monarchy itself was wrong, that America didn't need a king, and that independence was not only possible but necessary. For many colonists, this was the turning point. The unthinkable suddenly felt inevitable. On July 4, 1776, the colonies made their decision official. The Declaration of Independence was not just a breakup letter to Britain. It was a bold philosophical statement. It claimed that all men were created equal, that governments existed to protect natural rights, and that people had the right to overthrow tyranny. These words were revolutionary. They inspired hope. But they also exposed deep contradictions, especially in a land where slavery still existed. Declaring independence did not win the war. In many ways, it made it harder. Britain now fought to crush a rebellion, not manage unrest. The war dragged on for years. The American army suffered shortages, defeats, and brutal winters. George Washington held the army together not through constant victories, but through perseverance. Victory often depended on luck, foreign support, and the determination to keep going when failure seemed certain. France eventually joined the war, not out of love for American ideals but out of hatred for Britain. Their support changed everything. In 1781, British forces surrendered at Yorktown. The war was effectively over. 2 years later, Britain formally recognized American independence. But the story of America's founding did not end with victory. In many ways, it was just beginning. The new nation faced enormous challenges. How do you unite former colonies with different interests? How do you create a government strong enough to survive, but not so strong it becomes another tyranny? The Articles of Confederation failed. Economic chaos spread. Rebellion broke out. Out of this crisis came the U.S. Constitution. It was a compromise filled with debate, fear, and hope. It created a new system of government balancing power between states and the federal level, between branches, between liberty and order.